So last week, Jessica shared with you the first of our 4 principles or values that guide our community here. And that first one was grace, because it is so central to who we are here at St. Luke's. It's part of our DNA. That grace, because all have experienced God's grace, we in turn are called to extend to others respect, compassion, acceptance, and love. And this week it's courage. So what exactly is courage? You know, earlier in the week, on Wednesday actually, it was Thursday, I posted a picture of my 5-year-old daughter Shiloh on social media. There she is, standing very proudly, giving the peace sign with her Hello Kitty helmet, standing next to her Hello Kitty bicycle with the wraparound handlebars. And earlier this summer, I shared with you all a story that we were teaching Shiloh how to ride her bike without training wheels. She's not in here, is she? Is she downstairs? She's downstairs. Good, I can say this. Man, I wasn't sure this was ever going to happen, because she would get on her bike and she'd go about 3 feet and then just tumble over, and she'd go another 3 feet and just tumble over. And she wasn't getting it until this Wednesday afternoon. I get home, we go outside, she's in her Hello Kitty helmet with her Hello Kitty bicycle, and she gets on, and I think she's grown a little bit. Her legs are a little longer, and I gave her a push, and I don't know where it happened, but something clicked with her. And she's riding her bicycle up and down the street on her own, no training wheels. And she's smiling ear to ear, and she's shouting at me like she does, "Poppy, look at me, I'm doing it, I'm doing it." And I'm just standing on the sidewalk like this, and I'm smiling, because I know I get to preach on courage on Sunday. And you know what I mean? Sometimes, if you're like me, I get stuck up in the movies, and the movies influence the ways I look at things like courage. And it's when you do something really big, like you give up your life for someone, or you sacrifice something very great and powerful. And yeah, that's courage. It's courage, no doubt about it. But what about the everyday acts of courage we see right in front of us? And here was a little girl in her little kitty, her Hello Kitty helmet, Hello Kitty bicycle, falling down, getting up again, falling down, getting back on again, falling down, getting up and back on again. And even as she's shouting at me, "Hey, look at me, Poppy, I'm doing it," she's still falling. She's still falling. Even when you get it, you still fall, right? She's riding up the street, and it hasn't yet clicked with her that when you're going up a street, up a hill, and you need to turn, you actually have to pedal just as hard and even harder to keep your momentum, because when you turn, if you don't have that momentum, you what? You fall over. Courage in its simplest form is any time we keep engaging when it's hard. I mean, in its simplest form, that's what it is, when you keep engaging when it's hard. So I want to read with you a passage from a speech that was delivered in 1910 by a guy named Theodore Roosevelt. Some of you know this speech. It's called Citizenship in the Republic. Sometimes it's referred to as the man in the arena. But a passage from this speech goes like this: "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of the high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly." Now, Brene Brown, she's one of my favorite authors. She wrote a book called Daring Greatly, and she was influenced by this passage. And by the way, she's one of the authors that I highly recommend everything she's written. She's one of the few authors you can make that recommendation, and this book is no exception. And in the opening pages of this book, she says, "The first time I read this quote, I thought, this is vulnerability. Everything I've learned from over a decade of research on vulnerability has taught me this exact lesson. Vulnerability is not knowing victory or defeat. It's understanding the necessity of both. It's engaging. It's being all in. My brothers and sisters, when is the last time you have been all in? In your life, if you're living all in, you are going to fail. You will have moments where you get it totally wrong. You will have moments where you fall flat on your face and you experience pain. But if you stay engaged and if you decide that when it comes to your life and your faith you're going to be all in, then you will also experience moments of tremendous amounts of joy and overcoming. But you have to remember, courage and failure always go hand in hand. So let's turn to the Old Testament book of 1 Samuel for just a moment, shall we? It's a story about a young boy who's called by God, and it's a story about courage and failure, which has everything to do with what we're talking about today. And this story is loaded with details. I wish we could spend more time in it. We're going to come back to this story some other Sunday, but we'll breeze through it for now. Just the first 11 verses. It goes like this. Now the boy Samuel was serving the Lord under Eli. The Lord's word was rare at that time. And just to give you a little history, Eli you can think of as Samuel's boss in this story. The Lord's word was rare at this time, and visions weren't widely known. One day, Eli, whose eyes had grown so weak he was unable to see, was lying down in his room. And God's lamp hadn't gone out yet. And Samuel was lying down in the Lord's temple where God's chest was. The Lord called to Samuel. "I'm here," he said. And Samuel hurried to Eli and said, "I'm here, you called me." "I didn't call you," Eli replied. "Go lie down." So he did. Again, the Lord called Samuel. So Samuel got up, went to Eli and said, "I'm here, you called me." "I didn't call, my son," Eli replied. "Go and lie down." Now Samuel didn't yet know the Lord, and the Lord's word hadn't yet been revealed to him. A third time the Lord called Samuel. He got up, went to Eli and said, "I'm here, you called me." Then Eli realized that it was the Lord who was calling the boy. So Eli said to Samuel, "Go and lie down. If he calls you, say, 'Speak, Lord. Your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down where he'd been. Then the Lord came and stood there, calling just as before, "Samuel, Samuel." Samuel said, "Speak. Your servant is listening." The Lord said to Samuel, "I'm about to do something in Israel that will make the ears of all who hear it tingle." And we'll stop the story there. And I'll have to admit to you all, I don't know what it means for the Lord to say something to make all the ears in the land of all the people who hear it tingle. But what I think the storyteller is saying to us is, look, God is going to do a brand new thing in Israel. And Samuel, you are going to be part of it. Now, why is this story interesting? It's interesting because Samuel just flat out gets it wrong. Not just one time, not twice, 3 times he misses it. He gets it wrong. Why is this story interesting? Because it's relatable. You and I can relate to this story, right? How many times have you missed it? You just got it wrong. You know what would make this story uninteresting? My guess is it would not have made the scriptures if the story went like this. And on the first time the Lord called Samuel, Samuel jumped out of bed and said, "Here I am, Lord, what are we going to do?" That would be a boring story. That would always be a boring story, because the truth is, the stories of success without failures are boring. If you're the one at the dinner party telling everyone about your successes and you're leaving out the failures, you have become boring. Tell a new story. By the way, it's an interesting story because it's a story about courage. Samuel keeps engaging even when he gets it wrong. Even when it's hard, he keeps engaging. Samuel could have stayed in bed. He didn't have to get out of bed. Even on the 4th one, when Eli, his boss, told him, "Go back to bed because if it happens again, it's the Lord calling," he could have said, "I'm out. I don't want any part of that. I know what that means. It's going to be hard work. I'm just going to lay in bed for a little while." Samuel kept engaging, and essentially on that 4th time he stood up and said, "All right, God, let's do this. Let's do this." And by the way, don't miss the grace that's written all over this story. Who's the primary actor in the story? God. Come on, it's a Sunday school answer. God. Who does the initiating? God. Who keeps calling even when Samuel gets it wrong? God. When's the last time you were all in? Because the truth is, when it comes to your life and your faith journey, you don't have to get out of bed. You can stay asleep. You can ignore what God wants to do with your life. You can ignore what God wants to do through the life of this community. And while we're at it, let's just be honest with the moments we're going to have, because you will have moments where you simply don't want to engage anymore. You will have moments where you don't want to do a courageous act. This is normal. Because in your life, you might have that family member or those people that you love most of the time, until they start talking religion and politics. And you're here, and they're somewhere over here. And how many of y'all can relate with, man, I'm done with that. And I don't mean I'm just done with that conversation. I'm done with those people. And courage says, keep engaging, keep loving, keep locking arms. Or you might have moments where you just are terrified of leaving your comfort zone. You're not going to do it because you've seen too much, or you've been wounded one too many times, and the wounds have been deep. And so vulnerability for you doesn't exactly come easily. And yet courage comes along and says, keep being vulnerable. Even though you might get hurt again, keep being vulnerable. And you might have moments where you're not sure where God is or if God even exists. You don't want to get out of bed. You want to stay asleep. And for some of you, I'm talking in very literal categories here. Because for some of you, to get out of bed this morning and make it here was a great victory. And if that's you, I'm glad you're here. And you might have said to yourself, man, I don't get it anymore. I used to think I knew what God was all about. I used to think I knew what hearing God's voice was like, but I don't know anymore. And I don't even know if I know how to pay attention to that voice anymore. And you know what courage says? Courage says, keep going. Keep going, because apparently, according to the story, God doesn't give up on you, and God isn't going to give up on you. God keeps calling and acting even when you get it wrong. Grace is good, isn't it? You know, this week we had our Dudes on Deck gathering on Wednesday night. It's the men's ministry here, and one of the guys, we were outside in a backyard with the fire pit going, and one of the guys shared his story with us. And he was living in Erie, Pennsylvania. And during that time in his life had just gotten too difficult. Life wasn't going well. And so he had a plan in place. He was walking out on this pier, and his plan was on this cold night that he was going to jump off the end of this pier into those frigid waters, and he was fairly certain that his body would never be found. And as he's walking out on this pier, he hears this voice say to him, turn around. Don't do it, turn around. Don't do it, turn around, go home. Turn around, go home. Don't do it, turn around. And he's telling us that something came over his being, and he listened to this voice, and he turned around and went home. And as he's telling us the story, at this point in the story, he gets a bit of joy and overcoming, and he tells us that he wants to use his story now to be a voice for those who are still out on the pier, who need to hear that message. Don't do it, turn around. The story can be better than this. Don't do it, turn around. Don't do it, turn around. And I don't have to tell y'all why this voice is so needed in our culture, especially after the week we just experienced, right? 2 more suicides of young people right here in our own community, Arapahoe High School. Yeah, that voice is needed. That's why it's being called going all in. That's what it's like to be called, to go all in. You see, courage invites us to pay attention to that still small voice that's calling. Courage invites us to use your story to reach out to others. Courage invites us to be all in. So I ask again, my brothers and sisters, when's the last time you've been all in with your life? Because if you live that way, you will fail. You will have moments where you fall flat on your face. You get it wrong. You'll experience pain. But if you stay engaged, and if you decide that when it comes to your life and your faith, you're going to be all in, then you will also have moments where you experience incredible amounts of joy and overcoming. But we have to remember, courage and failure always walk hand in hand. So here's how we're defining courage here at St. Luke's. It's a very simple definition. We take risks by welcoming different viewpoints, engaging in difficult conversations, and moving beyond comfort zones. Because when it comes to this courage stuff, we're all in it together.